Hi, today I'm reviewing a lens with an extreme wide angle. It has a focal length of 9mm and aperture of f5.6. Such an aperture is not a problem when you're dealing with such a wide angle lens. So let's have a look at its build quality. It's made of metal, its aperture ring is smooth with gentle clicks. This ring is used for manual focusing and it's also very smooth. This lens has a metal lens mount. On the other side we have a bulging front element and unfortunately you cannot screw filters here. The second disadvantage is that you cannot use gel filters here on the back of your lens because some other lenses with also bulging element here allow you to use filters here on the back of your lens. This lens is available for many lens mounts. I have for Leica L mount, but you can also purchase it. Canon RF mount, Sony E mount, Nikon F mount, but you have bear in mind that this is a full frame lens. Of course you can use it in crop mount, but it shows you its maximum wide angle capabilities if you use it on a full frame, because this lens has viewing angle of 132 degrees, which is very wide. For example, a 14mm lens has a viewing angle of only 114 degrees, and here we have 132 degrees if you use it on a full frame body. Let's mount it on a full frame body. In my case it's Panasonic S1. It looks and feels great. By the way, the weight of this lens is about 500 grams. I wouldn't say that it is light, but it isn't heavy either. I would say that its weight is average, but it is rather small. Despite the fact that this lens has no autofocus, so this is a manual focus lens, it is very easy to use it because you can just put it on 3 meters here and shoot whatever you want. Because when you're using 9mm, everything will remain in focus. And now, in order to show you how wide this is, I'll show you a brief comparison. So now I'm recording this video using a 24mm lens on a full frame. The camera is situated on a distance at about 1 meter from me. Now I'm gonna change its focal length to 14mm. What you see now is 14mm on a full frame, and this is already very wide. This focal length is used for architecture and interior photography, but you have to be very careful about the perspective so that all the lines remain straight, both vertical and horizontal. 14mm focal lens isn't easy to use. I wouldn't recommend such a lens for newbie photographers or videographers. It is already extreme wide angle, but here I have 9mm lens, and before I put this lens on a camera, I want you to notice the flare that is coming from light above me, because now I'm shooting against light. There are many light sources, and this is a true test for a lens to hold contrast and overall image quality when shooting against light sources. So let's have a look at 9mm. Now you may see how much has changed. This angle is extremely wide, because again the camera is situated only 1 meter from me, but what we see reminds me of a tunnel. Intrinsic feature of all ultra-wide lenses is that they expand the perspective so that the distant objects seem further away from the camera, and this effect of perspective distortion is very visible here. And I want to stress out that this is a perspective distortion, not the lens distortion, because some people, some photographers mix these two notions. The lens distortion, this is what you see when you're shooting with a fisheye lens, because a fisheye has no correction of its optical distortion. But this lens is rectilinear, which means that the distortion here is corrected. For example, if I stretch my arm like this, you'll see that it is distorted, but this distortion is due to its focal length. It has to do with the perspective that gives you this 9mm focal length. But as for the optical quality, this lens is close to excellent, because as you may see, there is no glare or flare. There are many light sources here, and many of them look straight in the camera, so this light is really difficult for a lens to handle, but this lens handles it very nice. By the way, I have here another 7artisans lens, and this is a 15mm f f4 lens, which I strongly recommend, and I would say that I recommend this one over the 9mm, because 9mm is too extreme. And now, in order to show you this, I'll change these lenses. You may see this white streak here coming from the key light, which means that this 15mm lens isn't as great as this 9mm lens. So again, optically this 9mm lens is very, very good. I'll show you the sharpness test a little later, but now I want to tell you that the 15mm focal lens is much more useful. It is also very wide angle, but it doesn't stretch your corners as much as 9mm, and it is much more useful for interior or architecture photography and videography. This 9mm lens is an extreme piece of kit, and I would recommend it only to subtle connoisseurs, for those people who know what they want and who have already had experience with 15, 14 or 16mm lenses. So let's look at its picture quality. I have made this shot at a distance about 1 meter, and we see heavy vignetting. By the way, this vignetting doesn't diminish with the closing of your aperture. If you shoot at f11, for example, you will still get a lot of vignetting. But as for the sharpness, this lens is truly great, because starting from f5.6, the sharpness is great except extreme corners. In the right upper corner we may see a softness and some chromatic aberration. When stopping this lens down, for example till f11, the corner sharpness becomes better, but there is still this blue fringing on the corner of your image. In general, sharpness is not a problem for this lens. This lens has a moderate level of barrel distortion. For example, if I put here like +8, then it will be corrected. So there is a slight level of distortion, but I would say that it is moderate. As for the vignetting, it not only dims your corners, but there is some blue tint to it. So you see the center of the frame, which is okay, and here on the right side as well as the left side, that doesn't matter, it gives you dark and a little bluish corners. But when shooting in real world, it isn't that visible. The picture is overall very sharp. You can enjoy pixel peeping with this lens, and even in the corners in real world shooting scenarios, the fall of sharpness is not really visible. So this lens is truly sharp. So, as you have seen, this lens is truly great in terms of optical performance. The main issue about it is its extreme focal length. I will show you again the 15mm side by side here. Also enjoy this lens. Here you may see these two lenses. My advice is that if you're planning to try your first wide-angle lens, then start with the 15mm. Don't buy 9mm if you haven't tried 14, 16 or 15mm focal lenses, because 9mm is too extreme. I recommend the 9mm lens for experienced photographers, those knowing what they're buying. And now, if you certainly know what you're up to, so you know that you want this focal length, there aren't many competitors to this lens. For example, Canon has recently released the new RF 10-20 f4L lens, which is prohibitively expensive. It costs $2,300. This lens costs under $500, and I want to repeat that its optical performance is very high. The main issue here is whether you need this focal lens or you don't need it. This is all for today's review. You can check the details, the price of this lens in the description below. Subscribe to my channel and have a nice day. Bye bye.